Hi and welcome to a brief video overview of preparing a Cytospin slide. Now this procedure is typically performed after a body fluid cell count in order to concentrate the cells that may be present in the sample onto the glass slide for easier examination under the microscope. So we can see the required equipment and supplies in front of us here. So of course we have our cytocentrifuge. This one is made by Cytospin with the rotor head inside. That's where we're going to load our microscope slide and the concentrator. This is the cell concentrator assembly itself. So we can see here that it's got this little funnel attached to it on the right hand side, and the opening is where we're going to dispense our sample. We can open up the assembly here sort of by unfolding it, and we can see that there's a piece of filter paper or the filter concentrator inside of there, and that's where we're going to place our microscope slide. We of course have our body fluid sample that we're going to be processing. Today's sample, you can see it's labeled here. This is going to be a synovial fluid that we'll walk you through with today. We also have our glass slides, so we're going to need that, of course, a labeled slide with all of our patient identifiers. We have the clip that's actually going to hold the cell concentrator assembly together, as well as some 70% alcohol to clean that clip afterwards, and then some transfer pipettes to manipulate our sample with. So we're going to start by labeling a glass slide with all of our important patient information. This includes the name of the patient as well as the specimen ID. We're going to make sure we're labeling the frosted end of the slide. So again, I'm just writing the patient's name followed by the patient ID. And it's also a good idea, especially if you're working in a hospital where you're processing multiple body fluids at once, to list the type of specimen. So I've just written synovial fluid on the slide here. That's especially important in case there's going to be another tech looking at it under the microscope. So we're going to open up our concentrator here. You can see that the side that doesn't have the filter paper attached to it, that's where we're going to place our microscope slide, ensuring that the frosted end is facing up. So the frosted end is going to make contact with that filter paper. And then we're going to carefully close the assembly. And what you'll notice is that it won't actually stay closed. Sometimes it'll pop open. You can kind of see that just happened there. And that's when we're going to, that's why we need our clip here. So we're going to pull one out of the jar. These should already be disinfected and ready to go. So we're going to grab hold of that clip and then attach it to the concentrator assembly so it holds the entire assembly closed. The clip only fits one way, so you place it on so that the larger opening fits right around the funnel, just like that. And that's going to hold our assembly and microscope slide firmly in place. Now the next step is adding our body fluid to the concentrator assembly, and this is where you're going to refer to the cell count for the sample that you've likely just performed, as well as the SOP. If that count is very low, this may require a pre-concentration step with the sample, and if the count is very high, you may need to actually dilute the sample prior to adding it. For this particular fluid, the cell count fell within a range where we're going to add 2 drops of untreated sample directly to the sample container. So I'm just mixing that sample before I add it, using the transfer pipette to aspirate a bit of that fluid, and then placing 2 drops directly into the opening in the funnel. Now it's important to keep the concentrator assembly sort of on an angle here so that that fluid doesn't actually come into contact with that filter paper and the glass slide just yet. So by placing it on the table on an angle, that prevents the fluid from moving any further into the concentrator assembly. So next we're going to add the concentrator assembly loaded with our sample into the cytocentrifuge. We're going to remove the safety shield, and of course our centrifuge needs to be balanced. So this assembly that I'm holding here is the balance assembly, complete with the clip as well as a microscope slide as well. So the funnel needs to face towards the rotor. That allows it to sit on sort of an angle, again, to prevent the fluid from coming into contact with the slide prematurely. So I'm going to place the loaded assembly directly opposite of that balance assembly, placing the safety shield back into place, screwing that down firmly. And then we're going to close the lid on the cytocentrifuge until we hear the lock engage. The dials on the side here, this is where you can adjust your RPM as well as time. According to the SOP, we're spinning this at 1600 RPM for 4 minutes, and then we're going to hit that start button and allow the sample to centrifuge. Now once the timer is up, the centrifuge will beep at you to let you know that it's finished. We're going to hit the stop button to release the lock and open the lid, and carefully removing that safety shield. Then we're going to remove the loaded assembly, and again we want to carefully keep that assembly tilted so any remaining fluid again does not come in contact with the slide. And this is where you're going to slide the clip off of the assembly and then placing that directly into that 70% alcohol for disinfection. By opening the assembly, you'll be able to release the microscope slide and carefully place it on your bench, and the entire assembly gets disposed in the biohazardous waste. Now this slide is going to need some time to dry, and I'll hold this up and you can just sort of see that there is still a bit of fluid that hasn't quite dried yet on that slide. So we're just going to place that onto the bench and give it enough time to completely dry. So once that slide has completely dried, we can take a closer examination of what the final product looks like here before staining. So you can see that there is a circular area on that slide where all of those cells have been concentrated onto that glass slide. That's going to make it much easier to examine. So the next step would be placing that slide on a stainer or taking it through a manual stain. And the final product is going to look like this. So you can see here that that concentrated area is much more apparent now that we've stained those cellular elements in that body fluid, and that those have all been concentrated on the slide for us for microscopic examination to follow.